Now picture this. You're ankle deep in medieval mud, following a pig, because the pig seems confident. And the weird part is, this might be the most reliable navigation you'll get all week, because tonight, we're entering a world where getting lost wasn't embarrassing. It was normal, expected, practically scheduled. Stay with me, because by the end of this episode, you'll understand why medieval people could be 10 miles from home and feel like they'd fallen off the edge of reality, and how they still managed to arrive eventually using bells, smells, gossip, and sheer stubbornness. Stay with me, because by the end of this episode, you'll understand why medieval people could be 10 miles from home and feel like they'd fallen off the edge of reality, and how they still managed to arrive eventually using bells, smells, gossip, and sheer stubbornness. Here's the kicker. We've been trained by modern life to think a place is real if it's labeled. Street names, addresses, pins on a map, blue dot, reassuring robotic voice. But in the medieval ages, your blue dot is a headache. And before we get lost together, quick thing. If you like bizarre history where the facts are real, but the situations are unhinged, hit subscribe and join the night crew. And drop a comment. What's the most lost you've ever been? Like truly lost. Wrong turn, wrong universe. Suddenly, you're in a parking lot you've never seen before. Because trust me, medieval people would hear your story and go, "Ah, Tuesday. It's 1372, and you're standing in the English Midlands, just outside a market town that smells like wet wool and onions. You've got a small bundle, maybe a loaf of bread, maybe a letter. Maybe you're heading to the next fair because you heard there's work. Now picture this. You walk to a fork in the road. No signpost, no arrow, no next town 12 miles. Just two muddy ruts splitting like a bad decision. And the weird part is, nobody thinks this is weird. You look left, a path that curves behind a hedge and disappears into trees. You look right, a path with wagon tracks, but wagon tracks are basically medieval clickbait. Everyone follows them. Nobody knows where they lead. You do the only logical thing. You wait for a human. A farmer passes with a cart. You ask, which road goes to the river crossing? He squints at you like you asked a philosophical question. Then he says something like, take the road by the old ash tree. No, the other ash tree. The one that got struck last summer. Then keep the church bell on your left until you smell the tannery. If you hit the big stone that looks like a sheep, you've gone too far. And you nod like this is normal, because it is. But here's the kicker. This is not bad directions. This is the system. Now picture this. Modern navigation is built on standardization. The medieval world, not so much. 1. Roads weren't standardized. A road might be a Roman leftover in one place, and in another place it's basically a rumor carved into grass. And the weird part is, roads could move. Season by season, a path shifts because the ground floods. A field gets plowed. A law changes where people are allowed to walk, or carts simply start choosing a different line through the mud. So if you're imagining the medieval roads like neat lines on a fantasy map, nope, they're more like scratches on a well-used kitchen table. 2. Many people didn't travel far often. This part matters. If your life is mostly your village, your fields, your nearby market, then the world beyond that is not unknown, it's unneeded, until one day you do need it. And then, you're not going to a place, you're entering a story people tell. 3. Place names weren't always fixed or consistently used. Here's the kicker. One village might be known by one name to locals, another to outsiders, and spelled 5 different ways by whoever's writing it down. If anyone writes it down at all. So you could ask for Bridgemore, and the person you're talking to is like, "Do you mean the place we call the bridge by the marsh?" And you're like, "I mean whichever one does not end in my doom." 4. Literacy and access to written guides were limited. Even if you could read, the average traveler didn't have a neat little pocket atlas. And the weird part is, a lot of medieval maps weren't meant to help you get somewhere. They were meant to help you understand what the world meant. Now picture this. Imagine if your phone only showed directions inside your own neighborhood, and the second you left, it just displayed a wholesome message like, "That's medieval travel." Or think of it like sneaker culture drops. Stay with me. If you want the limited edition location, you need insider knowledge. You need someone who's been there, someone who knows the back route, someone who knows which bridge is out, which inn is safe, which lord's men are checking travelers. Directions are not public information. Directions are social currency. And here's the kicker. The best navigation app is a human who owes you a favor. Let's pin one solid detail to the wall, so we're not floating in vibes forever. Records suggest that for many travelers on foot, a typical day's travel might be roughly 15 to 20 miles, about 25 to 32 kilometers, depending on roads, weather, and whether you're carrying stuff. That's not a guaranteed number. Sources vary by place and purpose, but it's a useful ballpark. And the weird part is, that means your entire world scale is different. When a day is the unit, not miles, you don't think like a GPS. You think like a campfire story. Can we reach the next town before dark? Is there an inn? Is there a bridge? Will the road be swallowed by mud? Distance becomes time. Time becomes safety. Safety becomes whether you pick the correct muddy rut at the fork. And here's where it gets wild. Because you're not just navigating geography. You're navigating jurisdictions. 1 minute you're on land controlled by one lord, then another, then a monastery, then a town with its own rules and tolls and gates and suspicious looks. Now picture this. You walk up to a bridge and there's a guy there. Not a knight, not a villain, just a man. With a table. He wants a toll. How much? Depends. On what you're carrying. On where you're from. On whether he likes your face. And the weird part is, even if you're not lost, you can still feel trapped, rerouted, delayed, funneled. So people don't just get lost accidentally, they get pushed off the easy paths into the confusing ones. You're in medieval Europe. Roads are suggestions, signs are rare, place names are flexible, distances are measured in a day and before it gets dark, and directions sound like, turn at the tree that looks judgmental. Getting lost isn't a glitch, it's the operating system. But the weird part is, you might be thinking, okay, but didn't they have maps? Oh, they had maps. And here's the kicker. Some of the most famous medieval maps will show you heaven, monsters, and moral lessons. But not the one thing you actually need when you're standing at a fork in the road. Which way is west, and why does everything smell like sheep? Next section, we're opening the medieval map and realizing it's not a navigation tool, it's a world view. And once you see it, you'll understand why so many travelers were basically wandering through an illustrative philosophy poster. Now picture this. You've been walking for hours, maybe days. You feel like you've crossed through a dozen villages that you've never heard of, and your feet are screaming for mercy. And then, out of nowhere, someone pulls out a map. And the weird part is, it's not a map that helps you get anywhere. It's a map that makes you feel like you already know where you are. Because this map isn't about geography. It's about the world's big ideas. Stick around. Because tonight, we're diving into some of the most bizarre medieval maps that were never meant to get you anywhere. Unless, of course, you're headed to heaven, hell, or the edge of the world. Spoiler, there's a dragon involved. It's circa 1300, and you're in a dusty medieval library. Not some grand hall, just a small room where monks scribble away under flickering candlelight. And there it is in front of you, a map, except you don't recognize anything on it. No roads, no towns, no rivers, not even mountains that make sense. What you see instead is a giant circular world with a massive east at the top, a funny-shaped blob labeled Africa, and a huge, empty space in the middle with a bit of writing that looks like, "Here be dragons." No joke, it really says that sometimes. You're holding an Orosius map, a map created by monks that is more about what matters spiritually than what's real in front of your eyes. You're seeing Earth as theologically organized, where heaven sits above, hell below, and everything is arranged to remind you of just how small, insignificant, and unworthy you are of it all. But the weird part is, maps like this were way more popular than actual directions. If you wanted to know where something was, you didn't pull out a scroll of straight lines and numbers. Instead, you pulled out a worldview map and got a bit of religion, philosophy, and geography in one go. It's like getting a map of the world, but instead of landmarks, it has a list of values and lessons. Now picture this. You're standing in a dusty marketplace, staring at this map, and someone walks up to you. It's the town priest, or maybe just some overly enthusiastic merchant. They see the map and say, "Oh, that's not how you get to the river crossing, dear friend. That's how you get to the very edge of the world." And here's the kicker. Medieval maps were rarely practical. Most people, when they needed directions, really needed them. They weren't thinking about a big picture. They were thinking about survival. So why were these kinds of maps so popular? Well, for one, these maps were about ideas. An Orosius map wasn't a set of directions. It was a spiritual road trip. You didn't need to know that the river was 2 miles to the left. You needed to understand how earthly matters connected with heavenly ones. And get this, these maps weren't just for travelers. They were often used by monks as teaching tools for explaining the world's order, where to find truth and where to find danger. The dragons and monsters on the maps weren't literal. They were symbolic, representations of evil or temptation that travelers might encounter, like warning signs on a road you've never been down. Now, imagine if your GPS wasn't a system of streets or coordinates, but instead a guide to your soul. That's what medieval maps were like. It's like if Google Maps only gave you advice on life decisions and spiritual growth. Want directions? Google says, start from your house, but don't forget. Happiness isn't found in money, but in self-reflection. Or how about, you're heading to work? Great. you'll take a left at the corner of laziness and procrastination. But remember, the road to enlightenment is always uphill. And the weird part is, people would actually have trusted these maps as part of their journey, not for the facts, but for the meaning behind them. They were designed not just to direct you physically, but to guide your soul through life's labyrinth. Let's ground this in some medieval specifics. In 12th century Europe, there was something called the Mappa Mundi, which looked like a cross between a map and a medieval PowerPoint presentation on the meaning of life. The most famous one? The Hereford Mappa Mundi, which is around 1.58 by 1.34 meters, or roughly the size of your high school desk. If that desk had dragons and the holy city of Jerusalem scribbled at the top. This isn't a map that tells you where to find a cup of water. It's a map that tells you where the important places of Christian belief are, with Jerusalem, literally the center of the world, as the main focal point. It also features creatures like unicorns, dragons, and lions, blending geography with mythology. And the weird part is, these maps might have been the closest thing people had to a travel guide that wasn't purely based on where to find food, shelter, or water. You didn't just need to get to your next town. You needed to understand where you were spiritually in the grand design of the universe. But here's where it gets wild. Because not everyone was out there seeking a spiritual experience. Some people, believe it or not, were actually looking for practical maps. You know, the kind that told you, here's how you find the nearest river crossing without getting ambushed by bandits. But the weird part is, there wasn't much out there for those people. You see, the monks and scribes were making a lot of these maps, but very few were functional for practical use. They were often made for teaching or spiritual purposes, not for helping you find your way to the market. So what happens next? You guessed it. Humans start making things up. And soon, we'll see how travelers turn to written itineraries, sea charts, and, for the truly desperate, a really good guess. Medieval maps, not what you think. They're more about spiritual guides than actual geography. You might not find directions to the next town, but you will get a big, sweeping view of the world's meaning. Maps weren't just for getting lost. They were about understanding life itself. But the weird part is, we haven't even touched the road maps yet. The ones that actually show you somewhere. Those come next. And here's the kicker. Those maps don't look like anything we'd recognize today. They're filled with strange symbols, unrecognizable shapes, and are honestly more about adventure than actual travel. Next section, we're diving deep into how roads and rivers were mapped, and the bizarre ways people used early maps to figure out where they were when they had no idea. Imagine this, you're walking down a road, but every step is a gamble. Will it be muddy? Will it end in a ravine? Will you accidentally step into a bog and lose your shoes forever? And the weird part is, this is just Tuesday in Sichi, medieval travel. Roads weren't fixed, they were suggestions. Stick with me, because in this section, we're about to realize that roads weren't like anything we think of today. No neat highways, no GPS, just vibes, rumors, and a whole lot of bad luck. Welcome to medieval infrastructure, or the shocking lack thereof. It's mid-1400s, and you're standing at the edge of the road, your boots already sinking into the mud. You're not sure where you are, and honestly, that's not the worst thing. It's normal. Take a look around. You're somewhere between two villages, maybe 10 miles from one, maybe 20 from another. The road looks like it's been here forever, but who can tell? It's barely a path at this point. Just some muddy, rough tracks that wind through farmland, forests, and the occasional road marker, a broken stone, an uprooted tree, or, if you're lucky, a makeshift sign hammered into a fence. You've been walking for hours, and the road seems to be going somewhere, but is it the right direction? You'll only know when you bump into someone else, someone who's been down this way before. Maybe, or maybe they've just wandered off course themselves. But the weird part is, the concept of roads didn't even mean the same thing back then. Roads were really more like travel suggestions than actual infrastructure. They were defined by foot traffic and local knowledge, not by smooth paving or standardized routes. You could be on a road that's been there for centuries, but by the time you're using it, it's nothing more than a barely discernible trail cutting through nature. And good luck finding out where it's leading. Now picture this. You're halfway through your journey, still unsure of which way you're supposed to go. You're not worried. Why? Because in medieval Europe, getting lost was a feature, not a bug. And here's the kicker. There were no guarantees a road would even connect one village to another. In fact, many roads weren't intended to get you from one place to another. They were more like invitations to walk through the landscape and hope you reached a village. If you made it to the next place, great. If not, well, you just end up somewhere else. That was the journey. You had to trust the ground under your feet and the whispers of those who'd come before you. You were part of the road, not just walking it. Now, imagine the modern equivalent of this. Picture your GPS stops working, and you're just driving your car, turning down roads that feel right but have no signs. It's like you're taking a cross-country road trip, but instead of signs and mile markers, you're navigating by local gossip and turn left after the big oak tree written on a napkin. It's kind of like how your favorite influencer would describe a super exclusive spot. No map, no real directions, just an experience and a handful of followers who, if they're lucky, can figure it out too. And the weird part is, this actually worked for medieval travelers, as long as you didn't hit a toll booth, and let's face it, you probably would. These unofficial roads were your ticket to get in somewhere, eventually. Let's pin this down with some specifics. In the 13th century, England's King's Highways were officially established as a network of roads meant for royal use. These roads were supposed to connect major cities, markets, and towns. Sounds great, right? Well, records suggest that many of these roads were notorious for being poorly maintained and sometimes impassable due to mud, floods, or a lack of labor to upkeep them. And the weird part is, the best roads often ended up being the most local ones, created and maintained by communities, or even just the neighbors who used them most. You weren't relying on some grand royal network, but rather local knowledge. Now picture this. You're trudging through some muddy patch of forest when suddenly the weather takes a turn. You're stuck between two villages. You have to keep moving, but you've no idea which way you're going. It's getting dark, and there's an unsettling feeling in the air. But here's the kicker. In the medieval period, weather, seasons, and local politics could destroy a road's reliability in minutes. Floods, landslides, or even disputes between lords could render your trusty road completely useless without warning. So let's talk about how medieval travelers made it through these uncertain roads, with a little help from their friends, or in some cases, their local guide. Alright, recap time. Medieval roads weren't neat. They were more like paths that you just tried to make work. Getting lost, it was pretty much expected. So forget about your smooth highway or GPS, because in the Middle Ages, the real map was local knowledge. You'd get there eventually if you survived the bogs, avoided bandits, and kept an eye out for the next person who knew the road. But the weird part is, you might think the only problem with these roads is who you're asking for directions. Well, hang on, because next, we're diving into a whole new challenge. How do you know the road to the next village is safe? And how can you trust anyone you meet along the way when you have no idea who's telling you what? Next section. We're heading into tolls, thieves, and the real economy of the medieval road. Picture this. You're trudging along a path in the rain, your boots sinking deeper with every step. You've been walking for what feels like hours, but when you ask someone how much farther, they give you the medieval version of not far. And the weird part is, you have absolutely no clue what not far means. In the medieval world, distance wasn't measured by miles. It was measured by how much time you had left before sunset. Stick with me, because in this section, we'll dive into how time and distance didn't always add up the way we think they should. Spoiler, it's more about how far can you walk before collapsing than any neat unit of measurement. It's 14th century England, and you're standing at a crossroad just outside a bustling town. The sun's dipping low, but there's a whole lot of path left to cover. You ask an older man how far it is to the next village. He squints. Well, it's not far, but you'll want to keep going till you see the old mill. Then follow the big oak tree, the one that looks like it's been struck by lightning. You nod. It sounds reasonable, except, wait, how much farther? What's not far? This is where medieval time travel gets real strange. In the medieval era, distance wasn't measured in neat miles or kilometers. Instead, it was all about how long you could keep walking before your legs gave out. No standard units, no mile markers, just an unspoken agreement on how long it would take. Before nightfall, you're facing a landscape where 2 hours could mean 5 miles if it's flat, or it could mean 2 if there's a river crossing. And if you really want to complicate matters, some travelers would give you an estimated distance in leagues. But depending on who you asked, a league might be anywhere from 3 to 5 kilometers. But the weird part is, measuring time didn't help with roads that didn't even exist the way you imagined them. Roads could be non-existent, paved over by farmers, or turned into swamps depending on the weather. So knowing that you had an hour to go didn't make you feel any better about not knowing where the hell you were. Now picture this. It's getting dark, and you're still about to hit one more village. Your legs are sore. The road's gotten messier. You've passed a few people who've told you it's just a little further. But how far is that? And here's the kicker. Medieval travelers had a unique way of calculating distance. They'd often say things like, "Oh, it's just a half day's journey from here," or 2 hours if the weather's fine. This is where it gets crazy. Time became the real measurement of distance. Your journey wasn't about how many miles you covered, but how much time you could keep moving before night fell. And sure, if you were lucky, You could rest at a way station or inn, but those were few and far between. Most travelers, especially in the rural countryside, could end up wandering in the dark with nothing more than vague landmarks and a general sense that the road was somewhere ahead. And the weird part is, there wasn't an exact science to it. Travel time was more of a guess, based on memory and experience. Nobody had Google Maps saying, in 300 meters turn left. Now imagine if your GPS didn't tell you exactly how far you needed to go, but only how much time you had left. That's medieval navigation. No mile markers, no countdown to the next exit. Instead, your device would be like, okay, in an hour you should be there. If you don't hit traffic, a river, or any bandits. Or it's like a DIY road trip in the wild, where you only know how much gas you have left, and you have to guess how far you can get based on how far you've come so far. The whole thing is like a massive game of trust your instincts. The weird part, it's not as bad as it sounds. This lack of precision created a system where expectations were lower. Travelers didn't get anxious about being late or missing their destination because they knew that everything was a bit of a gamble and time was the only thing that really mattered. Let's nail this down with something solid. In medieval France, the idea of a day's journey wasn't universal, but a lot of travel was based around the idea that a journey could last anywhere from 8 to 15 miles, 13 to 24 kilometers. But that's depending on terrain, weather, and the traveler's endurance. A half-day's walk could be anywhere from 5 to 8 miles. Basically, it's about how long you could go before needing to rest. But the weird part is, some travelers would try to push through the day, heading toward an inn or resting spot. For them, the idea of time, not distance, was how you kept track of your progress. Now picture this. It's about to get dark, and you're this close to your destination, but suddenly you realize you didn't actually keep track of time properly. You haven't been watching the sun or the clouds or anything. But here's the kicker. In medieval travel, you had to keep track of the hours by the sun, by people who knew their surroundings, and by gathered experience. No one was clocking in or out. It wasn't about accurate schedules. It was more about caring less about precision and trusting yourself. And in the end, your arrival had less to do with where you were headed and more to do with whether you could arrive safely before night. Alright, recap time. In the medieval world, distance was a total guess, based on time, weather, and whether you got lost in the mud. You weren't counting miles, you were counting the hours left before the sun set. And if you were lucky enough to make it to an inn or a way station, congratulations, you were living the high life. But the weird part is, you could have walked 10 miles or 30, and when you finally got to the next village, there's no way of knowing if it was the right place at all, because next, we're going to dive into the real danger of medieval travel. Bandits, fake guides, and a whole bunch of scams. How do you trust the wrong people when everyone seems to be out to get your wallet or your life? It's early evening, and you've been walking through the countryside for far too long. You're supposed to reach a small village tonight, but the road has twisted and turned, and you have no idea where you are anymore. Your boots are sore, your stomach growling, and the light is fading fast. You've never felt more lost, Then, out of nowhere, a flicker of light ahead. It's a tavern, a humble little building with a thatched roof. There's a sign swinging in the breeze, and from the dim glow of the windows, you can hear the clink of mugs and the hum of conversation. You're not sure if you should go in, but what choice do you have? You approach the door, push it open, and are met with warmth and the smell of roasting meat. And the weird part is, you're not the only one. People wander in and out of places like this all the time. Inns and taverns weren't just places for travelers to rest. They were essential to the whole road economy. You never knew what kind of adventure or help you might find when you stumbled into one. Now picture this. You sit at a table, trying to collect your thoughts, and the innkeeper approaches. She asks if you want something to eat, and after a brief hesitation, you nod. As you settle in, you start listening to the conversations around you. Some are pilgrims heading to the same destination as you. Others are merchants just passing through. But you notice something interesting. Everyone seems to know each other. They talk about the roads, the weather, the latest bandit attacks, and the prices in the next town over. For all the chaos of the medieval world, there's community here. People who've traveled these paths for years, offering tips and advice to anyone who asks. And here's the kicker. Getting lost wasn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it was how you found the best people, the right connections, and perhaps most importantly, safety. These inns were places where you could hear firsthand what roads were safe to take, which were filled with danger, and where to find the next village. The key was learning to trust the people you met. But the weird part is, it wasn't just kind-hearted strangers who ran these places. Some inns were known to be theft hotbeds, where the locals would rob unsuspecting travelers or scam them out of their money. Not all hospitality was born out of kindness. Now imagine this. You're on a road trip, and you accidentally get lost in a small, unfamiliar town. You drive around for a bit, and eventually, you pull up to a cozy cafe that's packed with locals. You walk in, order a coffee, and start talking to the barista, who turns out to be a wealth of knowledge about the town. They not only help you figure out your way back, but they also tell you about the best spots to visit while you're here. It's like stumbling upon the secret spot everyone in town loves. Only you didn't even know it existed until you got lost. And the weird part is, that's the exact experience travelers had in medieval inns. These places weren't just places to sleep. They were the hubs of information, trade, and social exchange, where the lost could become found, often in ways they didn't expect. Let's make this concrete. In medieval Europe, inns were often attached to monasteries, town squares, or well-traveled roads. These were safe havens where travelers could rest, eat, and receive guidance. For example, in medieval England, an inn might cost a few pennies for a room, and the meal might be stew or bread with ale. Monasteries also played a vital role, as pilgrims would often rely on their hospitality when on long religious journeys. In fact, monks often provided free lodging to travelers who were on a holy pilgrimage, which made them central points of refuge for the lost. And the weird part is, in many ways, inns and monasteries were sanctuaries in an unpredictable world. A weary traveler might show up looking for directions, but leave with connections, safety, and sometimes a good story to tell. Now picture this. You're sitting by the fire, your body finally relaxing after a long day of walking. The innkeeper tells you about the road you're about to take tomorrow, and you're grateful for her advice. But then you hear a voice from the corner of the room. It's another traveler, someone who has been on the road for years, and they're talking about a shortcut you never even knew existed. They're explaining that getting lost isn't as bad as it sounds. It's just part of the journey. And here's the kicker. Local knowledge is currency. Whether it's toll road fees, finding safe places to stay, or understanding when to travel, local guides, whether monks, innkeepers, or fellow travelers, are what make the road livable. They're the secret lifeline for anyone who's struggling or simply getting lost. And the weird part is, many of these inns and monasteries weren't just places for rest. They were places where trade was also happening. Merchants exchanged goods, pilgrims exchanged stories, and everyone exchanged information. The roads may have been long and dangerous, but knowledge made the journey possible. Alright, recap time. In the medieval world, getting lost wasn't just about being off track. It was about finding refuge. Inns and monasteries were safe havens where you could rest, eat, and, most importantly, get the information you needed to make it to your next destination. Sometimes getting lost led you to exactly where you needed to be. But the weird part is, even when you found shelter, the journey wasn't always safe. The real dangers were still lurking around every corner. Bandits, thieves, and other threats were constant reminders that the road could be as much about survival as it was about reaching your destination. Next section. We're diving into the bandits, tolls, and the truly bizarre scams that medieval travelers had to face, and how getting lost could sometimes make you a target for all sorts of trouble. Imagine this. You're walking down a lonely road, convinced you finally found your way. But then, suddenly, a stranger appears. He claims to know the way, the shortcut, no less, and offers to guide you. And the weird part is, this guide is exactly the type of person you should never trust, but you don't realize it. He seems trustworthy enough. It's so tempting to follow him. Who wouldn't? Right? Stick with me, because in this section, we're diving into the dark side of the road, the bandits, fake guides, and scams that medieval travelers often fell for. It wasn't just about being lost. It was about finding the wrong person when you were at your most vulnerable. It's 14th century, and you've been walking along the road for hours. You're tired. You've asked for directions from a few villagers along the way, but the road has been nothing but endless twists and turns. It's beginning to feel like the journey is more about endurance than getting anywhere. Then, out of nowhere, a man steps out from behind a tree. He looks like he's just come from the next village. His clothes are clean, his hair well kept. He gives you a warm smile and says, "You seem lost. Lucky for you, I know these roads well." You hesitate but nod. You've been walking for a while, and trust is becoming a rare commodity in these lonely stretches of land. He tells you that he knows a shortcut, that the way you're heading is full of danger, bandits, flooded paths, and even wild animals. The weird part is, he's completely wrong. This guy is one of many scammers who roams the roads, offering false guidance to unsuspecting travelers. They sound credible, but they're more interested in leading you astray for their own benefit. Sometimes they're looking to rob you, sometimes to just waste your time and send you into dangerous areas where help might be scarce. Now picture This, you're following the man, and as you continue down the road, he seems to know all the right things to say. He mentions local inns, places to avoid, and how to stay out of trouble. You feel like you're in safe hands. He's a guide, a professional. But then, as you get further away from the main road, you notice something. The path is getting stranger. The trees are growing denser, the path is uneven, and the landmarks you've been told about aren't adding up. The man turns to you and says, "Don't worry, we're almost there. It's just a bit off the main road. You'll want to follow me." And the weird part is, you start to feel uneasy. That shortcut doesn't seem to exist, and you begin to wonder whether he's leading you into a trap. What if this wasn't a shortcut at all? What if he's just leading you into bandit territory? This is where it gets wild, because medieval scams weren't just about stealing your purse. They could easily involve bandits who were quick to make you believe the worst was ahead, then grab your valuables when you were too distracted or frightened to fight back. Now imagine this. You're traveling and you get a DM on your phone. Some local who's been to the area 100 times tells you there's a shortcut you shouldn't miss. He even sends you pictures of a picturesque cafe and tells you to take a left at the next exit. Sounds perfect, right? Except you follow the directions, and the next thing you know, you're stuck in a dead-end parking lot or a creepy alley with no sign of that cafe anywhere. The shortcut turns out to be a bait and switch, a trick to get you to a dead zone or worse, get you lost in a place where you might have to pay to get out. And the weird part is, this happens all the time in the medieval world. Scammers, like fake guides, don't need to outright rob you. They just need to waste your time, send you on the wrong path, and get you caught in a trap. It's all about psychological manipulation, making you feel safe while you unknowingly walk into danger. Let's ground this in a real-world example. In medieval Europe, particularly in England and France, a common scam involved fake guides who would offer to take travelers across dangerous borders. For a fee, of course. They would approach a vulnerable traveler and offer advice or even promise safe passage through certain areas. They would claim to know safe routes, avoiding bandits or hostile territories. But the real trick, the route was either useless, leading the traveler deeper into danger, or it was part of the bandits' territory, where they would be ambushed and robbed. Sometimes, these fake guides were working with criminals, serving as fronts for an ambush. And the weird part is, this wasn't just isolated incidents. These scams were widespread and common along major routes, like the Pilgrim's Way in Europe, or through trade routes, like the Silk Road. Fakes and bandits were always lurking just out of sight, taking advantage of the naive or desperate. Now picture this. You've been walking for hours with that fake guide, and you're beginning to feel like you've been led astray. You're starting to feel that unease in your gut, the one that tells you something's wrong. But before you can act on it, you hear the sound of hooves in the distance, and then you see them. A group of rough-looking men riding in your direction. Your guide has been watching them too. He's already started to walk faster, not toward a safe place, but toward the forest edge. And here's the kicker. It's bandits. They were working with your guide the whole time, ready to ambush you at the right moment. They know that you've already been led astray, and now the real test is whether you'll get away with your life. And the weird part is, these scams weren't just about being robbed. They were about being manipulated, getting you to trust someone you shouldn't have. The psychological toll was as much a part of the scam as the physical danger. Alright, recap time. Medieval scams were all about trust and manipulation. The fake guides were masters of deception, offering you safe passages that led you straight into danger. Sometimes they were working with bandits to rob you. It wasn't just about losing your money, it was about losing your sense of safety. And the weird part, getting lost wasn't the worst part, getting scammed was. But the weird part is, even when you didn't fall for a scam, the road was still dangerous, because the bandits and thieves weren't just lurking on roads, they were everywhere, and getting lost could make you an easy target. Next up, we're heading into the final stretch, the last leg of the medieval road trip. What happens when you actually get caught? The traps, the tricks, and the survival strategies you need to know before you head out into the unknown. Imagine this. You're out on the road, maybe traveling late at night, or perhaps you took a wrong turn. All of a sudden, you hear the unmistakable sound of hooves behind you, and when you turn, there they are, bandits surrounding you. And the weird part is, this wasn't unusual. You're not the first, and certainly not the last, traveler to fall victim to the threat of medieval road robbers. Stick with me, because in this section, we're going to uncover the hidden world of bandits, highwaymen, and the so-called bandit kingdoms that thrived along medieval trade routes. What did these roads look like when you didn't just get lost, but when you fell into the hands of the wrong people? It's mid-afternoon on a summer day. The air is heavy with heat, and the road is quieter than usual. You've been walking for hours, but you're not far from the next town. At least, you think you're not. Suddenly, a shadow looms over you, a horseman galloping down the road at full speed. Before you can react, another one appears from the trees on your left, then another on the right. Before you can say anything, one of the men calls out, "Stop, in the name of the road." You freeze. This isn't just an accident. You've been cornered. You've just walked straight into a bandit ambush. And the weird part is, this isn't just a random encounter. Bandits and highwaymen were as much a part of medieval travel as the roads themselves. The idea of safe travel didn't exist, and even the most experienced travelers could find themselves at the mercy of men who knew the roads better than anyone. They didn't just steal money, they controlled entire stretches of land. Now picture this. As the bandits approach, you start to realize that this isn't a one-time robbery. These men are organized. They seem to be talking to each other, almost like they've done this before. They might even have their own system, an entire network of men along the road, waiting to ambush travelers like you at the perfect moment. And here's the kicker. Medieval banditry wasn't just about isolated robberies. In many parts of Europe, especially in forest areas and mountain passes, bandits were well-organized groups, often tied to larger criminal networks. Sometimes these groups controlled entire sections of roads, even entire villages and towns, where travelers had no choice but to pay tolls or bribe their way through. And the weird part is, these bandits were often empowered by the very systems of authority they were robbing. Lords might turn a blind eye to these activities, as long as the bandits paid them off. It's not just highwaymen you're dealing with. It's a whole system of corruption. Now imagine this. You're driving on a long, desolate highway far from the city. Your GPS takes you through a stretch of road that's supposed to be a shortcut. But soon, the only thing you see are deserted fields and empty houses. You start to feel uneasy. And then, out of nowhere, a group of people steps onto the road, blocking your path. They start demanding money for you to pass. You try to reason with them, but their leader steps forward and says, "You don't have a choice." That's medieval banditry, but without the convenience of modern technology or police intervention. Bandits weren't just a danger. They were part of an entire criminal economy that stretched through the roadways, and they were organized enough to survive and thrive in a world where laws didn't always protect travelers. Let's ground this in something real. In medieval France, during the 100 Years' War, bandit groups often formed in the wake of widespread instability. These groups weren't just a nuisance. They became a critical part of life for many travelers. Known as the Jacquerie, they were made up of disenfranchised peasants and mercenaries who saw the chaos as an opportunity to take control of rural areas. In the 13th century, Robin Hood's merry men were a legendary example of how such groups could take over large areas of forest and rural land. They weren't simply robbing people. They were challenging authority and fighting back against corrupt systems of government and landowners. And the weird part is, for travelers, the fear of bandits didn't just exist on major roads. It was part of the unpredictable nature of medieval travel. One minute, you could be walking through the countryside in peace. The next, you might find yourself staring down the barrel of a bandit's sword, hoping your luck holds out. Now picture this. You're caught in the middle of a bandit ambush. You don't have a weapon. You don't know if they're going to take everything you have or let you go. Your heart races as one of the bandits steps forward, looking you up and down. And here's the kicker. While bandits could kill or steal from travelers, they were often just as much about psychological control as physical force. The fear of being ambushed was just as crippling as the actual attack. Many travelers were held at ransom, told they wouldn't be able to leave until they paid a toll or gave up valuable items. The weird part is, bandits weren't just outlaws. They were manipulators, taking advantage of travelers who were weak, unsure, or desperate. They understood the road was a dangerous place, and they used fear to trap people. All right, recap time. Bandits weren't just roadside robbers. They were part of an entire economy. These highwaymen were often organized and supported by local systems of power. They preyed on travelers, playing with their fear to control the roadways. Whether they were taking money, valuables, or your sanity, these bandits were serious business. But the weird part is, bandits weren't the only danger lurking along the road. After a robbery, travelers still had to deal with tolls, fake guides, and dangerous terrain. It wasn't just about getting robbed. It was about surviving the aftermath. Next section, we're diving into tolls, corrupt roadways, and the survival tactics travelers used to avoid getting caught in the criminal economy of the medieval road. Getting lost was just the beginning. Imagine this. You've been walking for what feels like days, and finally you see it, a small wooden bridge crossing a river. But before you can cross, a man in a rough tunic steps forward, blocking your way. He holds out his hand and says, "A toll for crossing the bridge." And the weird part is, you have no idea what toll you're supposed to pay. What are they even charging for? And why does everyone just accept it? In medieval travel, it wasn't just about getting lost or finding the right road. It was also about paying your way through a world that didn't have free travel. There were tolls, taxes, and sometimes bribery, and sometimes even highwaymen were just the tip of the iceberg. Stay with me, because in this section, we'll uncover the dark side of toll roads, the hidden fees travelers had to pay, and the underground economy that flourished along the medieval roads. From bribes to legal extortion, these fees weren't just a minor inconvenience. They were an essential part of medieval travel life. It's late afternoon, and you're trudging along a narrow road near a river. Your legs are sore, your stomach is empty, and your hopes of finding a village soon are fading. But then you see it, a bridge ahead, and just beyond it, you can make out the rooftops of what must be a town. You push forward, relieved that the end of the journey is close. But just as you approach the bridge, a man steps out from behind a wooden post. He's wearing a faded tunic, and his eyes are sharp. He gives you a quick, calculating look before saying, "You want to cross? That'll be a toll. 2 pennies. You pause. 2 pennies for a bridge. That seems like a lot for just a little crossing. You've traveled through forests, crossed rivers, and walked miles without anyone stopping you. Why is this bridge any different? And the weird part is, tolls were everywhere. Every road, every river crossing, every gate had some kind of fee attached. Whether it was a toll for a bridge, a gate tax to enter a city, or a road toll for passing through a region, these payments were as necessary as the road itself. But here's the kicker. Many of these tolls weren't official. They were more like theft with a badge. Some were legitimate, controlled by lords or rulers, but others were just roaming bandits, taking advantage of travelers at the most vulnerable moments. Now picture this. You're standing at the bridge trying to decide whether to pay. The man is still holding out his hand, waiting, but you feel something off about this. Something doesn't seem quite right. And here's the kicker. You notice a group of travelers a few feet away, arguing with another man at a gate. It's clear they're fighting over the toll fee, and one of them angrily tosses a few coins into the man's hand before storming off. The gatekeeper looks at you and waves you forward. It's like this system of tolls is more about intimidation and power than about actual services. But the weird part is, in some places, these tolls were officially sanctioned by local rulers. Towns and villages needed to raise money for their defenses, public works, or to pay for wars. So they charged travelers for the privilege of crossing bridges, entering gates, or using the road network. In a world where travel wasn't just a right but a privilege, this taxation system became an essential part of daily life for medieval travelers. Now imagine this. You're driving along a highway in a foreign country, and suddenly you see the dreaded toll booth up ahead. You pull out your wallet, hand over your payment, but the fee seems outrageous for the short stretch of road you've just crossed. It feels like you've been charged just for existing in the area. This is medieval tolls in a nutshell. They were often overpriced for travelers, forcing you to pay for roads that were barely maintained, or bridges that weren't in much better shape than the ground beneath your feet. But like modern tolls, you had no choice but to pay up if you wanted to continue your journey. The weird part is, just like modern toll booths, these medieval tolls were strategic. They funded local economies and helped regulate traffic, but they could also be exploitative, charging unfair fees to the wrong travelers, or just extracting money from those who had no choice but to comply. In 14th century England, the Crown controlled many of the major toll roads. The King's Highway, a system of roads that connected major towns, was a prime example of toll systems in action. Travellers were charged a toll to travel on these roads, usually collected at toll houses located at strategic points. But here's the kicker. While the King's tolls were designed to fund the maintenance of the roads, many toll collectors were corrupt. They would sometimes charge more than necessary or pocket the extra, leading to complaints from travellers. In fact, toll evasion was common, with travellers sometimes going to extreme lengths to avoid the tolls by taking alternative routes, which are often longer, more dangerous, or less direct. And the weird part is, tolls were not always enforced by the government. Local lords and even bandits could set up their own roadblocks, demanding fees that weren't officially recognized, sometimes leading to full-on bandit kingdoms controlling entire roads. Now picture this. You've crossed the toll bridge, but your problems aren't over. As you walk along the road, you notice something strange. A large fortified building just off the path. There's a gatekeeper, and he's looking at you like he's sizing you up. You get closer, and he calls out, "You can't pass unless you pay the toll." This isn't a gate into a city. This is a bandit's hideout, disguised as a legitimate checkpoint. And the weird part is, this happens all the time in medieval Europe. Many bandits set up fake tolls or toll gates along trade routes, and travelers had no idea who was official and who was simply out for their gold. In some areas, travelers had no choice but to bribe their way through, offering whatever they had, food, money, jewelry, just to be allowed to pass through safely. And here's the kicker. The underground economy of the medieval world often revolved around these informal tolls and bribes, from highwaymen to local lords, all the way to feuding families who controlled certain roads or bridges. But the weird part is, this wasn't just a matter of paying for your safety. It was about paying for your freedom. Once you entered someone else's domain, you were at their mercy. Whether you paid official tolls or got scammed by bandits, your journey was shaped by the economy of the road. A world where every crossing came with a price. Alright, recap time. Tolls weren't just about paying for services. They were essential to the medieval road system. Whether you paid official tolls or bribed your way through, roads were filled with hidden costs. Bandits and corrupt toll collectors made travel a minefield, and the underground economy made it even harder to know who you could trust. But the weird part is, even after all the tolls, bribes and scams, you still had to face the journey ahead, one full of dangers, bandits and uncertainty. The road wasn't just about getting lost. It was about surviving long enough to reach the next village, the next inn, or the next safe place. Next section. We're heading into the final stretch. What happened when you couldn't find shelter, couldn't find help, and had to rely on your wits and the kindness of strangers to make it through? Imagine this. You've been walking for what feels like weeks. Your body aches, your feet are blistered, Your supplies are nearly gone, and you've just entered a stretch of road you've never seen before. There's no more help ahead, no more travelers to ask for guidance. It's just you and the wilderness. And the weird part is, this is where survival becomes the only goal. You've crossed into a land where the road doesn't end. It just keeps going until you either reach a town or collapse trying. Stick with me, because in this section, we're heading into the final stretch of medieval travel. It's the hardest, the most dangerous, and the most unpredictable part of the journey. From dealing with last-minute hazards to relying on your wits to make it through. This is where you truly see how travelers made it to the finish line, or didn't. It's late afternoon. The sky is turning a dull orange, and the road ahead is barren, just a stretch of dirt and grass. You've passed through several small villages, but now you're in no man's land, an area where the road barely resembles a path anymore. Your food is running low. You've barely seen anyone for hours. You know the next village is still a few miles away, but no one has passed you, no signpost mark the way, and you're starting to realize the next step might be the hardest yet. Your instincts tell you to keep moving. There's no turning back now, but you can feel the weight of uncertainty settling in. Your survival depends entirely on how well you know the land, the weather, and the unwritten rules of travel. And the weird part is, this isn't an unusual situation. Travelers often had to rely on their own wits, learning how to adapt to whatever situation they found themselves in. It wasn't about following signs anymore. It was about surviving the unknown. Now picture this. You press on, each step heavier than the last. It's nearing evening, and you have no idea how far the next village really is. The road is starting to disappear, swallowed by tall grass and low shrubs. The only sounds are the wind and your own breathing. And here's the kicker. The landscape is changing. The road doesn't seem to go anywhere now. There are no signs, no markers, no familiar features. And as the shadows grow longer, you realize something important. You don't know how to survive in this environment. You didn't plan for this. But the weird part is, everyone who traveled back then went through this at some point. The fear of being lost on the road wasn't just physical, it was mental too. Travelers had to learn to trust their instincts, adapt to the land, and sometimes even rely on luck to get through these desolate stretches. Now imagine this. You're driving on a back road far from the city, and suddenly your phone signal cuts out. Your GPS stops working. You have no map, no directions, and no one to ask. It's just you, your car, and the unknown ahead. The road ahead doesn't look much like a road anymore. It's rough, winding, and unfamiliar. But you keep driving, hoping to stumble upon something that will lead you out. And the weird part is, this happened all the time in the medieval world. Travelers couldn't rely on a fancy phone or GPS. They had to use their senses, learn from experience, and trust their knowledge of the land to survive situations where the road seemed to disappear. Let's make this real. In medieval England, travelers had to navigate a system of roads that weren't always well kept. The major highways were better maintained, but smaller roads, especially those leading through forests, rivers, or swamps, were often unpredictable. Travelers could easily lose their way, especially after rainstorms or winter floods, which would turn these roads into muddy tracks or even bogs. And the weird part is, Even if you followed the road perfectly, you couldn't always be sure of what was ahead. Sometimes roads weren't meant to be traveled during certain seasons. River crossings would be impossible after rain, and certain paths were just impassable in the winter months. Now picture this. As the night draws closer, you start to realize something else. The weather is changing. Clouds have rolled in, and the temperature is dropping fast. You're feeling a chill that wasn't there just an hour ago. You've heard stories about travelers who didn't make it through bad weather on roads like these. Stories of people who got caught in the cold, the rain, or the fog, and never made it out. And here's the kicker. In the medieval world, getting caught in bad weather was one of the deadliest things that could happen to a traveler. Without shelter, without proper supplies, and without a guide or a plan, the elements could easily turn your journey into a fight for survival. And the weird part is, everyone had a story about someone who didn't make it through the weather. Survival on the road meant not just navigating geography, but understanding how the weather and seasons could change the course of your travel completely. Now imagine this. You're driving in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly a storm hits. The rain is so heavy you can barely see the road ahead. Your headlights are struggling to cut through the downpour, and the streets have flooded in minutes. There's nowhere to pull over, and you realize you might be stuck here for a while. That's the medieval experience of bad weather on the road, except without the modern comforts of a car. No shelter, no highways, no protection from the elements. Just you, the road, and the storm. And the weird part is, medieval travelers had to read the sky, predict the weather, and rely on survival knowledge. Storms, floods, and extreme temperatures could change everything in an instant. And when the weather was against you, all you could do was hope for the best. Let's ground this in reality. In 14th century England, travelers on roads often faced dangerous weather conditions. One famous example comes from the River Thames, which would frequently flood, turning nearby roads into muddy quagmires. The river, combined with seasonal rain, would often cause delays or even wash away entire roads, leaving travelers stranded. And the weird part is, people often had to wait out the weather, huddling in inns or taverns and hoping that floodwaters or snowstorms wouldn't ruin their journey. Winter travel, in particular, was notorious for being risky, as travelers were often caught between freezing temperatures and dangerous conditions. Now picture this. You're on your final stretch, heading toward a village you've been hearing about for hours. Your body is exhausted, your feet sore, and your stomach empty. But suddenly, you hear the sound of footsteps. They're too fast, too close. And here's the kicker. You've made it to the last test of the road, survival. It's not about reaching your destination anymore. It's about getting there without losing everything you've got. And the weird part is, this final stretch is where the most danger lies. You've survived the long journey, the weather, the bandits. But now, you're at the mercy of the land and the unknown. And sometimes, the journey itself feels like it's trying to keep you out. You've made it through bandits, fake guides, tolls, floods, and storms. You've battled through harsh roads and faced the elements. But the final stretch is where the real test of medieval travel happens. Survival isn't about having the best map. It's about endurance, luck, and making it to the end. But the weird part is, just when you think you're done, there's always something else waiting for you. Maybe it's the last twist of the road or the final danger before you reach safety. But the question is, when you finally get there, will it have been worth it? Imagine this. You're on the road again, except this time things have changed. The sun is still setting, but you've just seen your first signpost. You didn't have to ask for directions. You didn't have to rely on an innkeeper's advice, and no one is leading you down a dark, dangerous path. And the weird part is, this new world of signs, maps, and written instructions is just beginning to replace the old ways. The road is still long, but now it's a bit more predictable. Stick with me, because in this final section, we're diving into the slow, inevitable shift in medieval travel. The printing press, the rise of maps, and the emerging road signs all played a role in transforming the chaotic world of getting lost into something slightly more navigable. We're about to see how getting lost started to die, and what happened when it did. It's early 1500s, and you're standing at the edge of a well-trodden road. The scene feels familiar. A quiet town square, a few villagers talking near the market, a passing cart. But then you notice something odd. A small wooden signpost near the crossroads, pointing to different villages with clear labels. It's not much, but it's enough to make you stop and think. This road doesn't feel the same. For the first time in your life, you don't have to ask for directions. You don't have to trust the next stranger you meet. The road is beginning to speak for itself. And the weird part is, you're not the only one who notices. Travelers everywhere are beginning to encounter signs, maps, and even printed guides that make the road a bit easier to navigate. The world is changing, and it's changing fast. Suddenly, roads aren't just mysterious paths anymore. They're charted territories. Now picture this. You walk further down the road, and you see it. A leaflet nailed to a nearby fence post. It's not much, a few handwritten words, maybe some instructions, but it's clear and precise, giving you the exact direction to the nearest town. You read it and smile. For once, you're not lost. And here's the kicker. This leaflet is part of a growing movement in the medieval world. People are starting to write things down, creating printed guides, and map making is becoming a real business. Travelers no longer have to rely solely on oral tradition or vague advice. Now, there's something to hold on to, an actual representation of the road. But the weird part is, this is just the beginning. As the printing press continues to spread across Europe, more and more people are learning to trust what's printed, rather than the gossip of the road. For the first time, getting lost is no longer inevitable. The road is documented, recorded, and available to everyone, if they can read it. Now imagine this. You're on a road trip, and instead of a physical map or handwritten directions, you pull out your phone and follow the GPS. It's accurate, precise, and it speaks to you, telling you exactly where to turn next. No getting lost, no wrong turns. You follow the line, and it's almost like the road itself is guiding you. And the weird part is, this is exactly what the printing press did for medieval travelers. It was the beginning of modern navigation, an effort to bring the chaotic, unpredictable road into clear focus. Instead of rumors, travelers now had maps, signs, and written guides to rely on. It wasn't perfect, but it was a massive step forward in making sure that the world of wandering aimlessly was becoming a thing of the past. Let's make this real. In the 1500s, the printing press began to change medieval travel. One of the first major printed travel guides was the Itinerarium of Johannes Hunterus, a mapmaker and scholar who produced the first printed road maps and guides for travelers. This was a turning point. Instead of vague oral directions, travelers could now purchase a book or leaflet that described the path to their destination. And the weird part is, this wasn't just convenient, it was a revolution. Maps became tools of power, allowing merchants, pilgrims, and explorers to move with certainty. Travel was no longer just about hope and guesswork, it was about planning. Now picture this. You're at a marketplace, watching people trade goods, when a merchant hands you a map, not a crude drawing, but a detailed printed map of the area. As you study it, you realize this map shows roads, rivers, villages, and even crossroads, clearly marked out. This isn't just a map, it's a guide for someone who wants to travel, not just wander. And here's the kicker. Printed materials like these were beginning to spread, and for the first time in history, a traveler could look at a map and know exactly where they were and where they were going. The road was becoming a known entity. It was part of a larger system. But the weird part is, even as maps and printed guides began to flourish, the human element of travel never fully disappeared. Travelers still relied on local knowledge, oral traditions, and personal experience to make their way through the landscape. Maps couldn't account for everything. They could tell you where the next village was, but not whether the inn would be open, or if the road ahead was blocked by a flood. Alright, recap time. The medieval world was chaotic, but with the printing press and the rise of maps, travelers started to gain control over their journey. No longer were roads just mysterious, undefined paths. Thanks to printed materials, the road became a documented landscape. Getting lost was still possible, but it wasn't inevitable anymore. But the weird part is, even with all these new tools, the road never became completely predictable. The rise of maps didn't mean an end to getting lost. It just meant the road became a different kind of adventure. What happened next? Well, the next chapter in our story is about how these early changes eventually led to the modern world of roads, travel, and maps. Next time, we're talking about how roads became highways and the global journey from medieval paths to modern infrastructure. It's a trip that'll make you never want to get lost again. Or maybe you will.